Hello, welcome to another English Sparkling with Tweedy video. Sat on a bench for a change, a little bit out in the open. I'm sure someone will walk past and put me off, but I just wanted to enjoy the sky a bit for once. This is a wine I'm quite excited about. Long-term viewers of this channel will know that I love East Meon. It's a tiny vineyard. Is it just a single acre in Hampshire, in the village of the same name, East Meon, not far from Petersfield. One time residents of the bishops of Winchester. I think it was their sort of country estate when they were getting out of town, Winchester that is. And this is the newest vintage of it, the 2020 vintage. It has felt like a long wait for this, but I think they've possibly skipped a vintage or held it back. The last release prior to this was 2018, which could well have been getting on for 2 years ago now. I can't remember exactly when that was released. And it seems there either wasn't a 2019 vintage or we're just not getting it yet, and we've moved ahead to 2020. There isn't much written about this. I think this may be the first review of it online that I'm aware of. I had an email from George, the owner, that the new vintage was released, and I ordered 6 bottles practically the same day. It might have been the next day, I don't know, but this may have been one of the first bottles even opened by anyone other than George and co. A couple of things have possibly changed in the interim. This was always made under contract at Eastman. The vineyard is really just a vineyard. The grapes, which are apparently always in immaculate condition, were then always traditionally shipped off to Eastman. The first part of the winemaking process, I believe, is, or for this vintage at least, was still taking place at Eastman. But something I hadn't noticed before, perhaps this had also been the case for previous vintages. The disgorgement, the latter part of the sparkling winemaking process, is now done at a winery called Ithaca, which is it Ithaca, something like that, which I'm not familiar with. It's somewhere near Farnham. I think it is just in Hampshire rather than Surrey. So I don't know if that's a new development, but if the first part, the still wine part of making this sparkling wine, was done in 2020, then it still would have been under Dermot Segru at Eastman before he'd handed over to, is it Marcus Rayner Ward? Did I actually remember his name for once? I usually manage to forget that. I believe, as with previous vintages, this is still a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and it represents what they grow in the vineyard. And I think they put the whole lot in at the same time in a single pressing, and it's all co-fermented as well. So it's something like 75% Pinot and 25% Chardonnay. I'm sure that must vary a bit year by year because the comparative yields of those two might differ slightly, but it's going to be roughly in that ballpark. So this is usually a very Pinot dominant, Pinot in character wine, or at least the earlier vintages had been. 2018 to me seems surprisingly Chardonnay-esque, quite a lot of orchard fruit and stuff. I think they have made one more change in the winemaking here, in that have they switched from, they were previously using stainless steel tanks for the fermentation. I think I read that they have switched now to at least some aging in oak, which potentially has given this a bit more depth and character, possibly a slightly darker colour as well, which we might not be able to appreciate to its fullest because I'm using this rubbish stemware. That does have a nice deep gold sort of blush kind of colour to it. I don't know if you can appreciate that. The light's starting to go as well, of course. You can see a little bit of a sunset behind me as well, which is nice. So as I say, earlier vintages of this used to display huge amounts of Pinot character, and it was all red berry fruit, hedgerow fruit, that kind of thing, lots of Pinot. And then surprisingly, that 2018 vintage was a bit more Chardonnay-esque, a bit more orchard fruit. I think the initial nose here, before giving this a swirl, is perhaps a little bit of a mixture of both. I think I'm getting hints of berry fruit there and hints of orchard fruit, possibly hints of hedgerow. So, you know, this could be a bit of a blackberry and apple pie sort of scenario. But there's also a really nice, rich toastiness, and possibly that's pastry on the blackberry and apple pie, but there's some nice, rich autolytic character there as well, and a hint of something that I anticipate is going to be sweet, something slightly honeyed, something slightly brown sugar. Quite nice to begin with, actually. I do like that. With a bit of a swirl, maybe that's bringing out the orchard fruit a bit more. A bit more apple there, but I don't know, perhaps the Pinot character is also fighting to get through as well. There's definitely some sort of berries in there. Oh, what a delight on the palate. That is great. First of all, zing. Lovely zing. But then very quickly followed through with some little flashes of sweetness, some nice sweet notes. I'm reminded of toasted tea cakes briefly there, the sultanas and raisins, the dried fruit in toasted tea cakes. I do think we're getting some berry fruit character, some fresh berry fruit character on the palate, and a little bit more appley zing. So I think that is kind of carrying on with that apple and blackberry pie sort of theme. Some parts of that are coming across as really quite fresh and really quite zingy. Others are a little bit more reminding me ever so slightly of baked fruit. And there are edges of slightly honeyed sweetness towards the end. But overall, the main thing that hits you is how crisp, how zingy, how lively that is. It's different again. They're always slightly different. Every vintage from East Meon does seem to be slightly different. I think my favourite of all time was possibly the 2015, which really showed the Pinot fruit, I thought, to its best. This is doing something quite different again. Bit of a difficult place to film, so lots of people passing by, but hopefully you can see a little bit of the sunset over there. I think I'm probably at a wonky angle, aren't I, as well? I might have to correct that later. But yes, I think quite a lot of orchard fruit. Now thinking slightly about toffee apples somehow. I know I've given references to a lot of things that probably come across as quite sweet. This is, you know, certainly not overall very sweet. I think most people's first response to this is it's pretty bold on the acidity, pretty zingy, and that is a great backbone, I think, for all of those other things to hang off. I really like that. It's really full of life and alive. It feels like a while since I've had an English sparkling with that kind of zing and that sort of pizzazz. Miss that a bit. And as I say, also those slightly honeyed, slightly sweet edges. It's really lovely. Different again, as I say, from some previous vintages, but doing its own thing. I'm noticing autolytic character more. Possibly that's partly down to that switch to doing some oak barrel aging, I don't know. Good stuff. Try to move a bit so I get a better view of the sunset. It's not a great spot to see it because there's too many trees and other obstructions in the way, but perhaps I should try and give you some final thoughts on this. Well, I mean, the good news is if I've completely messed this up, I have another 5 bottles, so I'm sure I will do another tasting at some point, perhaps even try and get down to East Meon and do one down there. But as I say, definitely some sweet edges, and to me they're present even on the nose. I know you can't really smell sweetness, but the smell of sort of brown sugar, honey, something like that on the nose, pastry crust, that sort of thing. Fruit wise, can't really get away from something like apple and blackberry. It's got some sort of mix of, I think there is some orchard fruit there, but also some berry fruit or hedgerow fruit in the case of the blackberries. I suppose blackberries are both a hedgerow fruit and a berry fruit. And that palate is so attention grabbing, really pure, quite intense, thanks to that zing. And just lovely. There are no rough edges to that. There are no bits I don't like about it at all. I think they've done a really good job there. I think possibly some earlier vintages of this showed slightly, as I say, slightly different fruit expression, and they were perhaps, you know, lighter, and therefore you could appreciate those kind of nuances of the fruit a bit more. This is a bit, at least this first bottle of this is coming across as quite intense and attention grabbing, and I like that actually. It's great. I'm not complaining. It's definitely not a wine that you would you know, get bored of. I'm not sure I've done a satisfactory description, but for now I think I'm just going to shut up and enjoy the sunset. So like I say, there probably will be a follow-on tasting with one of the other 5 bottles left in the case in a different location at some point. For now, I think that's great. The 2020, really enjoying that, really intense, attention grabbing, as I say. I'll shut up for now. Cheers.